Hey guys, what is up, and I welcome each and every one of you to a new League of Legends video. Today we'll be taking an early look into the PvE for patch 8.12 on top of also a lot of other juicy information. So if you end up enjoying this video, then don't forget to hit that like button, but as usual this video will also be made in collaboration with Pro Guides. It's a great website that helps you improve your overall League of Legends gameplay and knowledge. Check out the link down below, and they also have a new Pike guide made by Bunny Fufu himself. So now, starting things off for this video, I actually want to go on the topic of YASUO, because YASUO at the moment is definitely an interesting champion. Ever since the ADC rework and the massive changes came out, regarding the crit items as well, for instance the Infinity Edge and all the Zeal items and Zeal itself, even though these changes were mainly focused to obviously nerf the ADCs that build crits, well, of course we also have YASUO that got nerfed by it as well. So at the very moment, for YASUO to essentially get to the same power spike that he always gets to before this patch, it will now cost him an extra about 300 or so gold just to get a Phantom Dancer. But even when he just goes for the Zeal itself, not only does that thing cost more gold, but it also offers less crit chance overall, so it really is just a lose-lose scenario. But then when we move into the topic of Infinity Edge, of course being YASUO's number 2 kind of, must-get item, well, this thing has also been somewhat questionable for him as well. Because this item no longer offers you the flat critical strike chance, and of course now it gives you that extra true damage on your crits, which it sounds great and against tanks for YASUO, don't get me wrong, it's pretty damn overpowered, but in the current meta, let's be honest, you're not really seeing too many tanks, you're seeing bruisers at most. And this is not where this item, and especially on YASUO, is going to shine very well. Now of course if you're a veteran YASUO player, you can still make it work, but for the majority of players, it's not going to be that good. And the biggest thing is, of course, Infinity Edge now essentially has YASUO's passive built into it as well, so no longer is YASUO's passive really kind of unique or interesting whatsoever anymore, because pretty much any single champion in the game can now have YASUO's passive as long as they actually build Infinity Edge. So with all of that being said and done, this brings me to my actual topic regarding YASUO. I do think he is going to get a rework very soon, as also stated by a Rioter on Twitter. Riot Blastoise replied to YASUO's tweet where YASUO was talking about how he tested the YASUO changes and whatnot and his thoughts on it overall, and he says the following: how it makes sense for his early mid game that he's a little bit weaker, but he's the champion that went down the most in win rate this patch, sitting at around a 42 to a 45% win rate depending on the data and filters. Now currently it's actually a little bit higher than that because YASUO did receive a quick hotfix, but at the same time, it's still nothing impressive. But moving on, he also says, we'll be doing buffs, which they already did, and maybe even more buffs to come in the next patch, likely going to be doing some larger changes, maybe addressing the crit passive, which of course we've just talked about, since Infinity Edge now has YASUO's passive, and with that being said, any champion in the game can now have YASUO's passive, which is a little bit kind of questionable. And they also talk about the armor penetration passive. So just with those two things alone, it looks like Riot is already looking into changes going towards his passive, and of course his ultimate passive, where once you actually use your ultimate, you have that massive penetration bonus, essentially a built-in last whisper for a few seconds after actually using your ultimate. Now I am not going to be surprised whatsoever if we see some massive changes coming over to YASUO, or at least an entirely new passive. Of course we already have the passive with his shield, but something else that essentially just substitutes the fact that he does have that double critical strike chance, since let's be honest here, he does not need that anymore. Again, Infinity Edge has the literal same passive built into the item. And I feel like now on top of this, also with the Infinity Edge giving you that extra true damage, I believe 20% true damage for all your crits, YASUO's passive ultimate, where he has that extra armor penetration, suddenly feels a little bit lackluster, right? By the time you're really using it and just going ham and making your plays and whatnot, there's a good chance you probably already have Infinity Edge or you're very close to it, and once you get the Infinity Edge, the extra penetration you get onto YASUO's ultimate is almost counterproductive with how the new Infinity Edge works with the true damage it now offers. So with all that being said and done, boys and girls, we can definitely look forward to some changes coming over to YASUO. I would say maybe even a mini rework. Of course, as you all know, I'm sure, once that actually comes to the PvE server, whenever that is, maybe in a week, maybe in 2 weeks, maybe in a month, maybe even in 2 months, once they finally get something down for YASUO and put it on the PvE server, I will have a gameplay video, and of course a video highlighting the changes as well. So make sure to subscribe for that, but let's go into the other changes as well. Now I did mention how there are some hotfixes that recently went out to the current live server, one of which being of course some changes coming over to YASUO, where they increase his base attack damage by 3, his Q, Steel Tempest, the crit damage has been changed from 150 to 180%, and of course there's also a bug fix where if you took Brawler's Glove and Infinity Edge, it now properly gives you the critical strike chance you should get, rather than some weird abnormal number. Following this, we also have a hotfix coming over to Caixa, because Caixa is very strong, and this hotfix honestly wasn't really enough. She is still pretty damn top tier. But the nerf was towards mainly her passive. passive where the plasma base on hit damage has been changed and lowered, the plasma per stack damage has been lowered, the plasma AP ratio has also been lowered, but at least on the bright side, the AP ratio on her W has been slightly increased. Next up, we also have a hotfix that came over to Ezreal, where his attack damage growth has been decreased from 3.11 to 2.5, and his passive has just simply got a reduced amount of attack speed offered, now being 10% at all ranks rather than starting at 10, going up to 14%. Now this is probably one of the worst hotfixes I have ever seen in my entire life, especially towards the passive change or nerf. I mean, Ezreal's passive wasn't really the main issue. The main issue is the fact that his Q ability with a Mirror Mana, with a Seraph's Embrace, and especially a Triforce, those three items, I mean, his Q ability is chunking you, and it's chunking you really damn hard. The passive was hardly an issue. Honestly, I sometimes forget he even has a passive because of just how completely useless it feels. So with that being said, of course, Ezreal is still insanely overpowered, and he is still very much freeload. Next up, we also had a hotfix coming over to Talia, because now her base attack damage has been increased by 2, her Q ability, Threaded Volley, the damage versus champions has been increased by 20% beyond the first rock, and just the overall damage on her E ability, Unraveled Earth, has been increased as well. And last but not least, for the hotfix that came out a few days ago, we also have a nerf coming over to Banner of Command, where now the minion reduction damage is now sitting at 40% reduced damage rather than a total of 70% reduced damage, because it was way too overpowered. 70% was an absolute massive amount of damage reduction for a minion. You just essentially rush this item, especially on someone like Lulu mid, and you probably already won your lane because your enemy laner is not going to be killing that minion very easily. They will need assistance. Now keep in mind, guys, this is very important. All of these hotfixes I just talked about, they are already on the live server. However, if you actually read the abilities or the tooltips, for instance, the Banner of Command tooltip, it'll still say 70%, but it does actually work as 40%, and the same applies to all the other champions. But now let's finally make our way to the PBE server and talk about some current buffs and nerfs happening there. So the first of which is of course being towards Ornn, where first his W, Bellows Breath, the self-slow when activating W has been increased from 0.75 to 1 second. And then moving on to his ultimate, Call of the Forge God, the slow has been lowered from starting at 40 to now starting at 20, to now going up to 60% rather than the live server being 80%. So even though tanks are already out of the meta, they're really making sure that they are just simply not going to be seen much play at all this patch, because now Ornn has received a nerf as well. But moving along to Sejuani, where there's quite an interesting change to say the least. Starting off with their passive, Fury of the North. The max damage against monsters has been lowered from 400 to 300, of course, nerfing her overall jungle clear. But as we move on to her W, the mana cost has been lowered on this ability by 15 at all ranks, which of course, is not the interesting parts. The interesting part is the fact that now it adds a 20% AP ratio on the flail swing, and now adds a 60% AP ratio on the flail lash. In other words, for the very first part of her W, where she kind of throws it in an arc in front of her, has a 20% AP ratio, and then when she kind of smashes it forward in a straight line, that now has a 60% AP ratio. But then moving on to her E ability, the AP ratio here has also been increased by 30%. Now 30% is actually quite 8-bit, and I'm hoping that it's not too much, because on top of this, the base damage on this ability has also been increased by 10 at rank 1, and a total of 30 by the time you rank it to rank 5. So I mean, we might start seeing this sort of off-tank AP-ish kind of Sejuani build coming out in the next patch, and honestly, it might be interesting. The damage is going to be very surprising to a lot of people that haven't been paying attention to the patch notes, so you can maybe use that to your advantage if you're a jungler and catch people off guard. Next up, of course, we also have the 2 new items coming out for the bruisers, the first of which being the Spear of Shogen. Now, I did mention it before, but we'll go over it once again because they also have these very sexy new looking icons. So for 2,900 gold, which really isn't all that expensive, you get 60 AD, 200 health, 10% CDR, a unique passive that reduces damage from champion attacks and abilities by 20 plus 10% of bonus attack damage, maximum being 60. And when you're near 3 champions in attack, you gain a Dragon Heart, which gives you a 200% increased block damage for 6 seconds, refreshing on takedown. So I've already given my thoughts on this item before. I think this item is honestly pretty damn overpowered, and I think champions like, bruisers, I guess, Riven and whatever, and Fiora maybe, and even some assassins might easily excel with this, because you will just not only do so much damage, but it scales with damage and defensiveness. Now, these items I personally hate the most. I hate items that, for building damage, you get rewarded for tankiness stats, or if you're a tanky champion and you build tankiness, then you get rewarded with damage. I don't like those two stats kind of helping each other out. I It doesn't make sense to me. They're completely opposite stats, and you shouldn't be rewarded for building one and getting the other one, you know, as the reward itself. Moving along to the second new bruiser item, we have Atmos Reckoning, also for 2900 gold. You get 25 AD, 30 MR, 38 armor, and a unique passive that states, for each second in combat with enemy champions, turrets, or epic monsters, gain AD equal to 0.5% of your maximum health up to 2.5%. Now this is essentially the opposite of Spear of Shogen, because Spear of Shogen, well, what do? You get a bunch of AD, and the more AD you get, the more tanky you get. This item is the opposite. For the more resistances that you get and more defensiveness on overall that you get, well, you get more AD. So I really just don't like these kind of items. I mean, it might be a personal thing. Maybe I'm just being salty or something. I don't really know, but let me know what you think about these items down below, guys. I want to hear your opinion as well. Again, my personal opinion, I don't like items that have the synergy between building defensiveness, getting rewarded with AD, or vice versa. They're completely opposite stats, and they should never be together. Next, very quickly, I want to talk about a nerf coming over to Celerity, or I guess a change, where now the movement speed has been lowered from 3% to 1.5%, so half. However, the adaptive AD has been increased to 9.6% now from 4.8%, and adaptive AP has been increased from 8% up to 16%, so getting double for both of those, while the movement speed being cut in half. Now, this is an overall nerf in my opinion. However, if you're a champion that builds a lot of move speed as it is, so maybe you're playing someone like Talon, or maybe you're playing someone like Master Yi, I think this item will actually be a bit more beneficial in the long run once you actually get those movement speed items. And the final thing I want to quickly talk about is a quote-unquote new rune called a Dream Snatcher. Now, this is essentially a minion dematerializer. It just has a bunch of changes and a changed name as well. Because what it does now is, instead of actually destroying the minion, it actually stuns the lane minion, which I don't really know why, but it just stuns them. And it gives you a permanent bonus based on which minion you actually stun. Melee minions give you 1 armor and 2 move speed. Caster minions give you 1 MR and 1.2 AD or 2 AP based on whichever, of course, you're actually building. It's adaptive. And siege minions giving you 10 HP and 2% attack speed. Honestly, I think it's a pretty cool change overall, and I'm pretty excited to test it out, but I just don't really understand why it has to stun the minion rather than just destroy the minion. That's my only concern. But either way, guys, that's gonna be it for this video. There you have it, a bunch of new changes on the PBE server. We have a bunch of new stuff coming over to YASUO very soon, hopefully. Again, you know, the mini rework mainly towards his passive and his ultimate passive, since those two are very kind of questionable things at the very moment, and a bunch of other stuff as well. So with all that being said and done, boys and girls, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to hit that like button. But thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you for the next one. Peace.